everyone, and thank you so much for participating to our workshop, Use Your Game Developer Superpowers to Fight the Climate Crisis. In this second part, we'll explore how can your game have a positive impact on climate with the help of the Climate Game Toolkit for content creators. If this is the first time we met, I'm Arnaud Fayolle, I'm art director, and I've had the joy to contribute to a wide variety of games for 15 years among some incredible teams around the world. But a few years ago, I started to feel it wasn't enough anymore. Seeing climate change, biodiversity collapse, people radicalizing, it seemed to me I was contributing to the problem rather than the solution. So at first I thought about chucking everything away and start growing vegetables or wind turbines instead. But then I realized that to change the world, we had to change people's mindset first, and video games does hold a real potential to transform 3 billion players across the world. So I met Paula in the early days of the IGDA Climate League and helped her build the design pattern workstream. Then I shifted my job to work for Ubisoft Positive Play, a transversal team tasked to demonstrate and amplify the positive impact video games can have on players, on society, and on the planet. Among some other things, I'm developing creative tools to support game dev in their quest for pro-environmental impact, such as during the Green Game Jam organized by the Playing for the Planet Alliance, which gathered over 50 game studios this year, united to tackle climate change. So, after listening to Brent's presentation, you already know why we must all do our part. But the good news is that as far as game developers are concerned, everyone really wants to help. Because we are a progressive bunch, we never settle with the status quo, because we deal with complex problems on a daily basis, and most of all, because we love what we do and we all want to keep making games in the future. But we've all been held back by the same question though. What can games do for climate? Can we do anything at all? Who can make a difference in our industry? I mean, I'm just an artist, maybe someone else should make the call or something. And most of all, how can games positively impact climate? Where should we start? So let's try to answer those together today. When we're thinking about what can games do for climate, the first thing that comes to mind is reducing our environmental impact, because it's no secret digital industry has a growing carbon footprint that must be addressed. But the most powerful potential of games is to influence culture and prepare players to tackle climate change. These also contribute to indirectly lower our carbon influence, as motivating players to reduce their own emissions can make them consume their game in a more sustainable way. Who can make this happen? Let's review the game industry key players. So on one hand, to reduce our carbon footprint, game studio can improve the way games are produced, making their workplace and IT practices more sustainable or selecting partners based on rigorous ecological criteria. On another hand, game marketing and comms can expand our cultural influence with good community management and direct communication to players, as well as organizing events to activate them towards specific climate action. Constructors have a lot of responsibilities in the way they design and manufacture our game devices, as well as how they handle their distribution and end of life. Some can be repaired, some can be recycled, and some could just keep playing game for decades if we just keep making game for them, which leads to the content itself. What's in the game? Built on 4 pillars that can each have a tremendous influence on both culture and carbon footprints. So let's see what games are made of. Every game content is built on at least one of those 4 pillars. First, the aesthetics, the visuals, the sounds, and generally more everything that can be perceived with our senses while playing. The narratives, the story, the setting, the script, in a world, the meaning of everything we see on screen. Gameplay, which includes the game mechanics and more generally all the interactive bits. And finally, the technology, the way the game is coded and how it runs, from the game engine to the device it plays on. Many aspiring game devs are wondering which discipline can have the most impact for climate activation. But the truth is, all of them can, and I'm going to prove it. So the most obvious one is the narrative pillar, as it holds the message of the game, our first tool for cultural impact. We human beings always think in stories, and every creative product conveys one or multiple messages. Let's pay attention to these messages, because Games have, unfortunately, a history of glorifying colonialism, capitalism, competition, and domination, all kind of behavior that led to the climate crisis we know today, and ignoring them means we are fine with that. We need to tell better stories. We can literally turn every game into a force for good if we will weave relevant themes into their narratives. And because games are so engaging, players are much likely to pay attention to our message compared to other forms of medias like TVs. So how could we do this? First, we can tell stories from climate frontline, such as Never Alone's depict the struggle of Alaska Native people. We can also reference familiar topics, such as Save a Rhino, which warns about poachers in Africa. We can educate players in fun and non-judgmental ways, like in Beyond Blue, where you can explore the wonders of sea life and learn real science in the most immersive way. We can restore trust in each other to foster a culture of collaboration, like in Signs of the Sojourner, which goes against the false assumption that everyone will turn against each other if time becomes hard. We can describe climate change as a legitimate threat to humanity. We don't need to invent any new bad guy every single time. Like in Horizon Zero Dawn, climate change and rising sea levels are the main cause for the whole storyline. And if you're afraid of scaring your player away, you can instill indirect message in games that seems to be pure escapism, like in Obsidian sci-fi RPG The Outer Worlds, where the players slowly discover around the course of the game that the behaviors of the colony's corrupt ruling class seems oddly familiar with what they already know. So all these examples demonstrate the hidden powers of our storytellers. Now what about our artists? By controlling the aesthetics, they hold the power of emotional impact. Tony K. Bambara once said, "The role of the artist is to make revolution irresistible." It couldn't be truer. Emotions make abstract concepts or geographically remote events relatable on a personal level. And it's so important because it's proven that emotion drives decision-making much more than cognition. You can explain to someone what needs to be done 1,000 times, will only act once you've reached their heart. So how can we use it? Naturally, we should leverage aesthetics codes to increase our message impact, like in Gibbon's Beyond the Trees, where the vibrant color palette of each level shifts the mood and create empathy for our monkey characters by making us feel what they feel. We can associate desirable outcome with feel-good aesthetic, like in Terranil, where restoring ecosystems happen in very satisfying bursts of fresh leaves that keep us asking for more. But the opposite works too. We can associate destructive trends with unsettling aesthetics, like in Final Fantasy VII, where the oppressive Midgard became the ecological wake-up call for a whole generation of players. Strong aesthetics can engage players around hard topics by making them visually appealing, such as in Greece, with beautifully depict depression and sorrow to better overcome them. Emotional impact is key to make players want to care about their world and reflect on the meaning of life. In Firewatch, where the scale and the serenity of the environment were so engrossing, it makes some players take life-changing decisions. If you're interested, you can look for Jack Kelly's stories online. It's amazing. So emotional impact is only one of the benefits aesthetic can provide. But what happens when narratives and aesthetic join forces? They unlock the power of visualization. Next tool in our toolkit. It's hard to imagine things we've never seen, right? What a future affected by climate change would look like. How could I ever be happy in a world without fossil fuel? Because our brains are wired to favor short-term problem solving and hardly relate to long-term or geographically distant problem. But in that case, how do we know what kind of future we want? World building and representation can give players a vision to embrace and make their own, so they know in which direction they should act. So let's review some examples of actions here. First, we can show what a regenerative future looks like in Overwatch or in any solarpunk universe, actually, where we represent a world in which humanity has already acted to solve the climate crisis. But the opposite is just as valuable. We can illustrate what's at stake if we don't act. Plasticity does it well by representing a future choking under plastic, designed to make players react in disgust. We can inspire sustainable ways of living and normalizing them so that they don't seem alien anymore. That's what City Skyline Green City does by exposing players to modern practice of sustainable city planning. Oh, and just to share a personal story, this was the idea when I was working at Playground Games, and we've decided with the environmental art team to represent only renewable power sources in the open world of Forza Horizon 3 and 4. We even celebrated them as beauty spots. So it proves that every team can do something at their level, even when the whole game isn't about climate or environment in general. We can represent happiness that's not relying on consumerism to counteract the toxic dream of always buying more junk that we've been fed since childhood. Stardew Valley did it so well that it inspired a whole genre of wholesome games where player can relax by living a simpler life full of simple pleasures. And you can also inspire player to reconnect with nature by representing its beauty. The game Hoa did this magnificently by representing whole ecosystems of friendly creatures in gorgeous detail at an intimate scale. Our next tool will require some strong narrative and a dash of gameplay. You probably already know it well. It's the call to action. So recent surveys show that most players actually want to act to save climate, but they just don't know what to do. The games are perfect to prime players to take action in real life, either explicitly or implicitly. And we don't even need an immediate response from them, as repeated exposures to calls to action can prime our brain and make us more likely to answer this call in the future. Once we're properly primed for action, players just need the right nudge at the right time to get activated. So how to use it? Of course, you can explicitly motivate players to take action in the real world, like Hungry Shark World did with their Finban Now campaign. Or you can point at individual solution at an individual level, like in The Sims 4 Eco Lifestyle, which could be a tasting pleasure of individual climate actions. But many climate actions are better tackled collectively, so your game could encourage players to connect with other players to amplify their impact. You know, like how Pokemon Go build many local communities that way. What if that encourage them to work together towards some climate actions? A player can be encouraged to support or contribute to climate organizations like NGOs and charities, as they are much more likely to do so if they have been conditioned by the game to care about this topic, like Monument Valley 2 did with their Lost Forest update. Oh, and another story. Do you remember when Ghost Recon Breakpoint did this last year as part of their Green Game Jam activation? They managed to get 566,000 trees planted in the real world, more than 500,000 in just a couple of weeks. Not bad for an operation that only lasted that long, right? Okay, back on track. One last thing. When the intrinsic motivation of doing good deeds isn't enough, you can also add extrinsic motivation by rewarding positive behaviors that players are doing in real life. Like in the game Earth Ranger, kids can get stickers and collectibles in the game for every mission they complete in real life. And calls to action are just one way to get players to act the way we want them to. But with a good gameplay, we can transform players to make them spontaneously more virtuous all the time. And that's when we call it behavioral transference. For our brain, solving problems in games and in real life is pretty much identical. And when we repeat the same action in games days after days, they can become habits. And the habits acquired in game can transfer to real life if the context of your life and the habits and your own personal value are aligned. So games can be used, for example, to build emotional resilience, the way Spiritfarer makes you practice the painful experience of grieving for the loved one we lost in a caring context. Think of how easy it could be to address the solastalgia the grief for our disappearing landscape, to avoid being paralyzed by our own emotions where we should be acting instead. Games can also push players out of their comfort zone and question their own assumptions, like Spec Ops The Line did a few years ago by making players question their own violent predispositions. They can normalize eco-conscious behaviors, such as low-carbon activities, like in the game A Short Hike. They can teach new life skills, directly usable in everyday lives and necessary for sustainable yet uncertain futures, like Wholesome Out and About does by teaching players how to identify edible plants and cook them in delicious recipes. They can let players experience the joy of doing good deeds, like in Alba Wildlife Adventure. And to counteract our habit of equating conflict with violence, games should also allow peaceful resolution of conflict. The Dishonored series does it well by making non-violent options more interesting to play and leading to better endings. We should also strive to identify and diffuse the negative behaviors we're accidentally normalizing with our games. The game 80 Days diffused the players' hoarding habits by making their inventory space tiny on purpose, forcing them to think twice about how useful each item really is. So behavioral transference can be achieved with gameplay alone, but with the help of technology, we can leverage another unique tool to video game, the simulation. We know our brain values short-term outcome rather than long-term one, which makes it hard to weigh the long-term consequences of today's actions. Unfortunately, to fix climate, we need to act today for reaping benefits we won't even see if we succeed. But luckily for us, game can simulate the rule of our world to make us experience the long-term consequences of our action on a much shorter time frame. Experimentation is also the best available method to make us understand complex systems by interacting with their individual components and appreciate how they affect each other. So how can we use this to save climate and become resilient? First, we can ground our game in real earth science and data, rather than making them purely fictional. The game Plague Inc. isn't only fun, it's also based on real science. So by playing, you learn a lot about the behaviors of viruses. And during the COVID pandemic, over 120 million players played it to get a better understanding of the situation, which led the dev to team up with the World Health Organization to develop a free spin-off of the game named The Cure, designed to help players understand how to beat COVID. Games also give us the opportunity for trial and errors in safe environments. In the game Fate of the World, you can fail at fixing climate 1,000 times before understanding the full complexity of the task at hand and finally finding a possible solution. You can aim at demonstrating the interconnections between human and nature, like in the Eden burning mode of Anno 1800, where extracting natural resources without paying attention to the state of the ecosystem can lead to the collapse of your settlements. And whenever it's possible, you can build systemically to encourage player curiosity and experimentation. Like in the sandbox game Echo, where everything in the game is so interconnected that the smallest action from one player can have ripple effects on the whole server. And Chance is going to tell you more about this game in the next session. So this is a simulation tool. Now, what can our engineers do to help climate? Well, they own the tremendous responsibility of optimization. Because before thinking about doing good, we should at least ensure we do no harm. And with the ever-increasing horsepower of our devices, they had led us to build bigger, prettier, but also more power-consuming games. And it's no secret that the more power we use, the more carbon we emit in the atmosphere, making the problem worse. So of course, the first action we think about is how we can optimize our code to reduce power consumption. But wait, I know what you're thinking. If you're working in video games, you already know that we are already optimizing our games the best as we can, so they look pretty and run smoothly. But think about this. Mobile games such as Subway Surfers have taken extra optimization steps specifically to save battery life. So if they can do it for battery life, we can probably do it for lowering our emission on console and PC games as well, right? So a simple step here could be to propose an opting power saving mode. You know how many console games give players a choice between a performance mode with a 2K resolution at 60 FPS or resolution modes with a full 4K resolution but locked at 30 FPS? Why not propose a third eco mode in between with a simple 2K resolution locked at 30 FPS? Because even if a fraction of our millions of players use it, it will already make a big saving. And for stabilizing the climate, every ton of CO2 counts. We could also aim at always releasing on multiple platforms at once. It wouldn't only increase the reach of our potential cultural impact, but also reduce the need of buying multiple game devices. Is there anyone among you who own one PC and a PlayStation and an Xbox and a Switch so that you can play everything? Well, a lot of people used to. Genshin Impact made this part of their strategy, which influenced many creative decisions throughout development, but it paid off with more than 50 million daily active users. Something else we rarely do is to bring the extra optimization done for console or mobile port of the game back into the main SKU. What we call the miracle port, such as Ori and the Will of the Wisps on Nintendo Switch, went through extra lengths to preserve the crisp graphic and high frame rate of the original game on a console that use up to 20 times less power than others. So if such progress is achievable on one console, why don't we bring this saving back to every version of the game? And finally, we have the power to fight device obsolescence and reduce our electronic waste by releasing our games on previous generation devices as well. Many players only throw their own devices away when they realize they can't play any recent game anymore. But what if we keep making some? Persona 4 did this when they released on PlayStation 2, even though the PlayStation 3 has been around for years. So this was only a few examples of what optimization could mean. Now, what could we get by mixing efficient programming with a strong sense of aesthetic? For the lack of a better word, in France, we'll call this graphic sobriety. Game graphics evolved so much since the beginning of their existence. And because games used to be so technically limited, there's a popular assumption that good graphics rhyme with good games. And over the years, we've been conditioned to always max out our graphics, to push the resolution and the frame rate and all the graphic settings as high as our device allows us to, sometimes without even seeing the difference anymore. And graphics are still responsible for most of the game power consumption and disk size. So you can imagine how it made me feel as an art director who's been pushing this for the highest graphic quality all my life. So what can we do about this? First, we should tailor our art direction to our target experience, as it's what will drive many other technical and scope decisions. We should ask ourselves, do we really need our game to aim for photorealism, or is there some values striving for something different? Maybe something cheaper. Breath of the Wild has been universally acclaimed as a beautiful game, perfectly exploiting the limited resource of the Nintendo Switch. However, the game used very few high resolution for a game so rich. And do we think the game would have been a better experience if we could see Zelda's skin pores? Probably not. Instead, we can rely on smart asset and texture usage to limit GPU usage and memory footprints. Team Fortress 2 did this brilliantly with lean graphics that still look beautiful and stylish today, even though the game is 15 years old. Also, we don't even need to impose this choice on players. We could educate them about the impact each graphic setting have on power consumption and carbon emissions so they can take their own decisions. You know how now it's a common practice for PC game to show how much VRAM each graphic option will use so players can tailor their experience to their needs. I would love to see the equivalent in watt per hour or gram of CO2 emitted according to your local energy mix. We can then give players agency to balance their own power consumption. So that they can find a balance between graphic beauty and carbon emission they feel comfortable with. The game Skies Children of the Light does just this with even very explicit wording. And it's fun to notice that the highest resolution is not even unanimously desired. If you run an older PC, or if you have a slow internet connection, or just can't see the difference between 2K and 4K texture, you'd rather keep your game size small, right? Some games, like Far Cry 6, have already made their 4K textures optional when downloading the game, saving more than 30 gigabytes of data. It's a huge step in the right direction, as download size are responsible for a big chunk of modern games emission. And there we are, 8 creative tools for games to have positive impact on climate based on 4 main disciplines. We've just explored over 40 examples of actions, but these are merely a fraction of everything you can do. Paula and Trevin will dive deeper into some of those later, so please stick around if you wish to learn more. Okay, we're almost done. Thinking about all the action we've just seen, I'd just like to point out a few key takeaways. First, number one, every game can make an impact, regardless of your game genre, your game type, your setting, or your target audience, because green games are not a genre, it's a desired outcome. So please keep making the please keep making the game you make best, because we need to preserve the wonderful diversity of experience our industry is famous for. Number two, every discipline is important. Artists, writers, designers, every talent has a role to play to either reduce our environmental impact or generate a positive cultural impact for climate. And every facet of your green activation can be tackled either individually or collectively as a team. Number three, everyone can contribute, because making greener games don't even need to be a company-wide policy. So don't wait to be asked. See what you can do within your area of action, in your current company, in the game you're working right now, because the power is already in your hand. And finally, number four, every game must be fun, because games are only impactful if players want to play them, right? And nobody wants to play a boring game. So let's make green game fun, and let's make fun game green. That's it. I hope this you now feel more empowered to design games that will make our player save climate and become resilient. I'm done talking, so now the fun part begins. Let's see how you can use the Climate Game Toolkit to unleash your own creative potential. Ready? First, let's figure what is your developer superpower. So we need to figure out what is your expertise about. Is it mostly aesthetic, narrative, gameplay, or technology? Trevin should have placed some post-its around your table, so you can just grab a post-it, write your name next to it, and your expertise.
If anyone needs more paper, more pads, let us know.
So please do it even if you don't consider yourself an expert in anything. Just ask yourself, what are you usually investing most of your time on? The goal is to make you feel more relevant when you will brainstorm the next part. And it will also allow you to split the work more efficiently with your team around the table. It's okay to pick several expertise if it feels relevant to you, right?
Okay.
So let's just do it.
You have enough?
It should be really quick.
Cool. Some extra. Do you need these? Oh, you have pens. Okay, cool. Do you want some? Cool. Sure you can, but later we're gonna tear some.
Trevin, if I can let you time keep and just tell me when when we're ready to move to the next part, because it's hard to read the room from here.
Of course.
Thank you.
Okay, I think everyone's good, but before we move on to the next step, I just want to say a word for those of you that have joined recently, just to give you a recap. Every table, every team was asked earlier to pick a climate topic to focus on for the rest of the day. So if you've just joined a table, go ahead and take a moment to ask what climate topic your table has chosen. And if your entire table is new, thanks for coming. That's awesome. But pick really quickly was one climate resilience, one climate change topic to focus on for the next steps. If you need help with any of that, just flag me down, and I'm happy to help with that. That climate topic is going to inform all the next steps, which I think we are ready for. Next step, over to you.
Cool. So now we're gonna ask ourselves, how can your game help solving the climate crisis and making people becoming more resilient? So consider each tool we've talked about to ensure you're thinking at 360 degrees. Write your ideas on Post-it notes. One idea per Post-it, so it will make it easier to work around for the next step. Start with what's closer to your area of expertise, what you written on next to your name on the first Post-it, and then don't hesitate to spread out to other areas. There's no bad idea at this point, so don't hold back. Write as many ideas as you can. Don't worry about how feasible they are at this point. Crazy ideas are more than welcome. And yeah, try to write maybe at least 3 ideas each, so we'll have enough material to move to the next step. So we're going to take like 10 minutes for this, right, Trev?
Yep, 10 minutes. So again, just to recap, quickly write down ideas on the paper, tear them off, put them down on the put them on your table, and then you can use that giant piece of paper we've given each table to array them out, just like you see on the screen, categorizing them. So just come up with, there's no such thing as a bad idea. Don't think, just write. Don't think, just write. Come up with a lot of ideas. Try and fit across all of those categories. Again, if you have questions, just raise your hand, I'll come over.
Topic or any topic?
Try to choose one topic for the table, one climate topic, and then in terms of game design, any idea.
On that topic, everyone has to come up with 3 ideas on the same given topic.
On the same climate, you're working together as a team on a climate topic, yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering, like, if we can write down general ideas around different topics and pick one.
If you haven't chosen a climate topic yet, and if you have an agreement, then I think a really quick way to do that is for everyone to write one topic that you're interested in, and then kind of just shuffle it, and just pick one, and move on to that part.
What I meant was, like, we might have ideas around multiple topics, right? Having idea on a single topic might be difficult, so that's where.
We need to keep you focused because at every step of today, we're going to go further along the design path. So if you go too broad right now, then
it's hard to make a game that's relevant on all topics at the same time. So usually if we're trying to tackle too much in the game, we end up only talking about generalities and the game isn't really impactful. It's we noticed much more, there's much more impact to really pick one climate item and really deep dive into this one. It's not about making one game to save the world. It's about contributing to how the whole game community can help solve many problems. And also, if you guys have any question, anything specific, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, I'm here for this.
If anyone does have any questions for Arnaud, just call me over. We can bring you a microphone so that he can hear you. Do you have a question for? No, okay, just for me. Okay. we're going to give you 1 more minute before moving on. Things are going pretty well, I think.
Sweet.
Thank you. OK, good job generating ideas. We're going to talk about the next step. Over to you, Arnaud.
Okay, cool. So now we have a lot of ideas. One thing that can be hard for a team is to figure out which idea should we focus on first. So this is why we have this step. So now we're going to look at all the action post-its we wrote previously and consider how effective and how easy to implement they are. And let's just arrange them on this matrix. Let's try to think relatively and consider how we'd rate each IDs against each other. Which ID seems to have a higher impact or lower impact compared to the other, and which one seemed easier to implement or harder to implement, and place them along this matrix. So we can just take, 5 to 10 minutes to do it again? What do you think, Trev? So what's interesting here is to talk as amongst yourself in the table to discuss about the technicalities of each action and the projected impact and reach an agreement. It's you have to reach an agreement on this for the debate to be interesting.
Just giving you a 5-minute warning for this segment. 5 more minutes to sort your ideas. Again, if you need any help or you get stuck, just call me over. And again, Arnaud is available for questions. We have a mic for him. But also, everyone seems to be working really well, so keep on it. All right. You've had a full 11 minutes to sort through your ideas and to categorize them. We're going to move on to the next step to narrow it down. Don't worry if you don't feel like you're done. We're working on this game concept all day. You're going to have more time. but we are going to move you along. Over to you, Arnaud.
All right. Actually, you're almost done here. So the next step is to build your plan of action. And if your impact/implementation matrix has been well sorted in the previous step, it will be extremely easy to draw a plan of action from there. So you can first start to ditch all the actions that are both hard to implement and low impact. You can thank them and let them go. You don't need them anymore. So now you must have identified some quick wins. The quick wins are the ones that are high impact and easy to implement. So it's a no-brainer. Let's do them first. Such action can even be snuck into any project, even if the game wasn't necessarily planned to be a green game in the first step. So it's easy to convince people in your team or your management to do our bit. Next, we have some major features here. There are the actions that are high impact, but that are harder to implement, therefore will take more time. But they're also probably more meaningful than the quick wins. So make sure you don't discard them. If you don't have time to implement them from day one, we can keep those actions in your project backlog for an expansion or even a future game. But don't discard them. If you think they're high impact, they are good value. Finally, we can have also identified some nice to have actions. They may be lower impact, but they could be worth investigating if the opportunity arises during the course of the production, such as if a staff member has free time between tasks. That's it. You have a plan of action here. And that was all for me today. You got this.
Thanks so much, Arnaud. Everyone give him a round of applause. He can hear you if you do it.
Thank you for your attention. So I hope this was useful and really inspired you to tackle the climate crisis with your game. And feel free to reach out to join the IGDA Climate Sig community on our Discord server. I will always be happy to help. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Our next segment, we're going to talk about some examples of climate design that are in action already that might serve as inspiration. Now, Chance usually does this part of the talk, and Chance has built this part of the talk, but Chance is also on his way to COP27 in Egypt, has run into some major difficulties getting there. So I'm going to pretend to be Chance. I'm going to pretend that I'm 10 years older and that I made Call of Duty. Welcome. I am now Chance. And I will talk to you about his part of the talk. So Chance and Grant and I have worked with at the IGDA Climate Sig, which Arnaud just mentioned, and it's one of the fantastic resources that have come out of that community, which again, we invite you to join, and I'll keep giving you the link later to join again. One of the coolest resources to come out of this is the Climate Games database. This database is a collection of data on projects that have included climate or environmental themes in them. So there's a collection of stuff that has done this before. So I'd recommend saving this link for later reference on the bottom, that tiny URL, DHZZMZHS, or you can see me later and I can give you that link also. Most of the categories are very self-explainable, but I'll go into more detail on a few of them. They've got some IDs, they've got game title, developer, they've got year, they've got a Metacritic score to helpfully encourage folks to realize that yes, you can make a climate game that includes climate topics in your game and it's still successful, it's a successful game. The Climate Games database also categorizes games in terms of salience, like how prominent are the climate themes. There's different types of messaging. So implicit games might be a world that looks like ours, like Minecraft or Horizon Zero Dawn, like a more aspirational, different world. Or they could be more explicit messaging, where the game is set in our real world, or one that mirrors it really closely, like a Call of Duty, a Grand Theft Auto, Rainbow Six Siege. There's also intrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic games deal with climate themes in a way that's very embedded into the gameplay and game systems. And intrinsic ones are players are acting on their own initiative within the game systems. Yeah. So there is this game. Let's see if this works. Yeah, so this is one of the games that the Adrian Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center has helped fund. And so I'm going to talk to you a bit about this game. So how many of you have played a game, or how many of you played a game called Eco? Cool. How many of you have heard of a game called Eco? Nice. Yeah, so Arsht helped create this game, and I'll talk to you a little bit about why it works and what makes it so successful. But if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a game that on the surface looks a bit like Minecraft-y, but it's really a game about a community of players coming together to help save the world from an imminent disaster. But in the purpose of playing the game to save the world from imminent disaster, you need to deal with the resources of the ecosystem and ensure that you do not destroy the world that you're trying to save in the process. So most of Eco can be summed up with this concept of the tragedy of the commons, which is a famously old economic problem where individuals have access to a shared resource, but no one is paying attention to this common resource. So individuals act in their own interest at the expense of the group. And these interests are typically aligned with their skills and professions in Eco. So this can result in overconsumption, underinvestment, and depletion of resources. So Eco has tons of different systems built into it that are all intertwined in many different ways. Most of these have direct effects on the climate model in the game. So there are game systems also in terms of constitution, elections, laws, treasury, and taxes, but the game is also trying to model not just ecological themes, but also the social ways that people deal with ecological themes. But in terms of ecological themes, the game models those too. Models temperature, moisture, salt ranges, soil conditions, nutrients, and a whole range of ecosystem factors to kind of build a simulated world to help drive these player actions and conversations. The housing system is interesting to me, as I'll mention later. It really interacts with the motivation models of the players. So there's room types and furniture and ownership and rent. I'll mention how it interacts with player motivation models in a moment. So Strange Loop, who are the developers of Eco, they sought to demonstrate to players the relationship between ecosystem and ecology action and government policies. Because again, they're interested in that social dynamic of how we behave within and among our ecosystems. So they also wanted to encourage players to have discussions around climate that are grounded in observations of ecological systems. So there is no guidebook that comes with the game on how to sustainably use resources of the ecosystem. Instead, the game makers want players to learn how to behave by looking at the actual data they're producing through gameplay themselves, and can then convince other players they are playing with on the same server of what they believe. And players take on different roles and specialties in the game, so that their incentives during play are heavily influenced by the livelihood they've chosen for themselves, just as in the real world. So a lumberjack player may be less inclined to halt deforestation than the general population players because their livelihood depends on it. So even though players are working together towards a common goal, their individual incentives and desires guide their decisions in conflicting ways during play, and navigating through those laws and scientific evidence to achieve success and avoid ruin, that's the core experience of Eco. So the thing about housing that I think is really interesting is that when players log off, their character earns experience, and the experience multiplier is determined by the amount of stuff they own in the game. You get bonuses for a really nice house. More rooms, more furniture, more appliances, and so on make you level up faster when you're logged off. But getting stuff for yourself harms the environment, which then harms the goal of the game, which is to save the world. So there is a tension, as there is in the real world, about where the proper balance lies. What does it mean to be a responsible player of this game? What does it mean to be a responsible citizen? The game raises these questions. Another game that Arsht has worked with and given money to that has since been published is Garden Story, published by Rose City Games and developed by Picogram. Garden Story they describe it as a vegetable-based action RPG, which revolves around unifying a broken community. It's not as climate-focused as Eco, but it's a game focused on community, which allows Arsht to work with Rose City Games to include a lot of climate content. The game involves dealing with heat issues, where players help counter urban heat island effects by increasing the town's green cover. The game deals with water conservation in that players directly address water conservation issues and systems, and they also introduce flood prevention measures by creating and maintaining specific flood prevention infrastructure in the game. It also deals with air pollution in that players need to repair heat lines, chimney, furnaces. They'll heal NPCs that are affected by pollution and deliver clean burning supplies. Garden Story has been shared with content creators to share gameplay during their stream, and it's been featured as spotlight videos. So it has a bunch of impressions and reach and players. And the end result of this is that Arsht believes that the number of people that have been meaningfully exposed to climate resilience topics through this game, the number of people that have been meaningfully impacted by this game in terms of the climate crisis, is about 327,000 people, which is pretty cool for a small, indie, commercially successful game that's aimed to deliver climate messaging. So that's me done being Chance. I hope you believed my act. Thank you. Thank you. I'm now going to turn things over to Paula, which will require me to switch PowerPoints. And she is going to talk to you about building a theory of action. And then once she's done talking to you, we're going to have worksheets and have you practically apply everything that she talks to you about. Slideshow. OK, I think we're ready.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming to this workshop and continuing on in this segment. Congratulations for making it this far. My name is Paula Escuadra. She, her pronouns. I serve as the co-founder and co-chair of the Climate Special Interest Group of the International Game Developers Association. We're a community of over now, I think, 500 game developers, researchers, students, teachers, climate activists, people who just really love games, all trying to make sure that we can bring everyone on the journey with us towards a more sustainable video game industry. In my day job, I serve as the senior UX strategist for Xbox Game Studios Cloud Publishing team. I also serve as the sustainability workstream lead for XGS Publishing. And we work to support developers as they're leveraging new, interesting technology in hopes of unlocking creativity and meaningful communities with players wherever they are. I've been in the industry for 15 years, from startup indie to nonprofit game education to major AAA development and publishing. And so in every single context, I've directly seen the power games can have to make us as humans engage with complex systems. And so I'm very excited to be speaking with you all today, and I'm glad you're in this workshop. Lastly, I have a double master's in business and public administration from Presidio Graduate School with a focus on sustainability, community building, and thinking about how we can leverage participatory design approaches like this workshop to bring people on the journey with us to create awesome solutions that can enable us to meet people, planet, and profit. Before we dig in, I just want to quickly remind everyone that it's okay that this feels complicated and messy. It is completely okay that it may not feel perfect the first or even the 10th or the 100th time around. Every single one of us will need to experiment because this is a very new space and figure out what works best for us and the experiences that we want to create. And so as George E.P. Box says, every model is wrong. But some are useful. So take what makes sense for you and your needs from this, ask questions, question our assumptions, and by doing this as a community, we get closer and closer to figuring out how to really do this well. The idea that games can change the world probably still feels fluffy, like a vague black box that feels a little uncomfortable to believe, because it almost feels like almost greenwashy or unrealistic. And a lot of green activations that you see in the industry have a focus on building awareness and making actions in the real world super low lift, so that the fear around this and the fear of this not having a real impact gets less and less over time. The more concrete the actions are, and the more immediate the feedback is to the player to say, like, something has happened and it is a positive thing that has happened, is really important. Examples for this include the game prototypes and updates that were made through the United Nations Green Game Jam in 2021. And they'd raised $800,000 for environmental causes through campaigns using these games. And through the mapping of direct game purchases to reforestation projects, Alba Wildlife Adventure, as an example, was able to plant 1 million trees as a result of game sales. When exploring how players responded to these types of experiences, 80% of players' attitudes were positive or very positive towards the studio because of these efforts. So from a brand perspective and player trust perspective, that's also something important to keep in mind. So thinking about these experiences and thinking about how to make climate actions concrete, more bite-sized, more actionable, it's really difficult. The path to behavioral transference, or the transfer of gameplay behavior to real-world action, is very complex and difficult to measure. However, it's important to reinforce what we said previously, where players are increasingly concerned and care about finding ways to act. Ergo, games that can reach, potentially over 3 billion players have an opportunity to enable them to feel that and do that. A study released by Yale and Unity this very year further validates the idea that players care about the environment, are worried about the climate crisis harming them personally, and that they are willing to use their purchasing power and wallet to indicate when they are pleased or displeased with a company that has not met their climate commitments. And so our game design lens and our opportunity to think about how they relate to these systems and interact with these systems are very applicable to social and environmental movements. So thinking about how to apply game design thinking to real-world action, we'll work with you today to build a theory of action. And apologies for the timing, this will go through really quickly, but there will be a link to access these slides through a quick reference guide later on. We'll be building a theory of action today, and what that really means is that we're creating an evolving living hypothesis of what activities in a game will help players go from an understanding of a problem to acting on a problem. This is basically our roadmap, or our mental model for how we want players to identify cause and effect relationships. Given the urgency that we feel and experience with the climate crisis, it can be really easy to get caught up in the scale of the problems. And a lot of this can feel like a problematic black box, and we don't know how to go from awareness to action. But we can take what we know from game design and start to break down this complex idea of behavior change into more concrete components. So first, what are the theory, in terms of building a theory of action, what are the hypotheses we can form about the activities a game will have that a player can practice that can help us get closer to generating our target outcomes? Where do we want to start? The first piece that is very important is to understand our players. Understanding the context in which players may enter a game and what may impact their decision making. Some of the things to consider here are understanding the ways in which players may identify the type of actions in the game, how they may interpret a system. Good questions for us to ask here are, what are the biases or expectations that they may have regarding what they can and can't do? And what is the cultural knowledge that we may need to know about players in order to understand whether or not a problem that we're talking about is relevant or even important to them in the first place before they enter a game. Assuming that we can establish a shared context for where players are before they enter our game, we can then explore what they need to know in order to have a baseline understanding of what's happening. What do players need to be aware of? Some of the questions that we may want to ask at this phase of our theory of action is, what are the foundational climate crises, policies, issues, science concepts that may be necessary in order for players to just understand what exists and what doesn't exist? and how may that science and problem be contextualized for players who may come from different cultural, environmental, socioeconomic backgrounds? Because they'll, depending on what resources a player may have available to them, they may have a different interpretation of what is a valid problem. Assuming we have an understanding and can establish players' acknowledgement of the existence of a problem, we can think about what they need to know in order to specifically identify like why that problem exists. So awareness is acknowledgement of the problem in the first place. This next phase of cultivating knowledge is around why that problem exists. So once there's awareness, there's much more likelihood of players like then asking the question of like, why does this happen? What are the factors that have contributed to it? And so some of the questions that we want to ask here are like, what are the cause and effect relationships that players need to understand to get the why and how of a problem? Assuming that we understand where players are starting from, we can help them build an awareness or an acknowledgement that a certain problem exists, and they understand why that problem came to be. We can then think about what players need in order to feel prepared enough to act upon that knowledge. So in terms of self-efficacy, this is the confidence in knowing what we can do to solve a problem because we understand why it exists in the first place. And it's really the ability to feel prepared enough to act if an opportunity presents itself. Some of the questions that we may ask here are like what players would need to understand in their specific context to know what solutions are going to be effective to manage that problem, either on a local scale that they can more directly interact with or globally through collective global efforts. What do players need to understand and directly experience in the game in order for the solution and the steps to implement the solution to be as concrete as possible? And what are the different ways in which we may want to frame the potential solutions so that players across different contexts can understand? An important thing that I love to call out here, and this is a wonderful quote by Maria Sands, who's the Us2 Games CEO. They're the ones who created Monument Valley and Alba, a wildlife adventure. She says that if you want to tackle sustainability, you need more than science and tech because we've had that for years. What we really need to do is change hearts and minds. And so the concrete understanding of the problem, the cause and effect that has resulted in a problem, and knowing what the solutions are, may not in itself be enough to actually create action. So really it's a matter of that perception of self, like my own individual preparedness and sense of confidence, knowing that if a opportunity to act on a solution presented itself, I would know what to do and I could do it. So really, the knowledge that we enable players to gain access to have to come paired with stories and emotional context and values alignment with a pro-environmental attitude. So it's really making sure that players feel a sense of certainty that the knowledge is worth having, and that the solution is worth pursuing because it is important to take care of the environment. It's important for our ability to continue living where we are and thriving where we are. The key pro-environmental predictor of positive behavior is hope in this context. And so for us, like as many of us probably know, the present day experiences that we have with the climate crisis and the way in which it's already affecting our day-to-day life can be really difficult to deal with. It is a huge, major threat that can be very disruptive to our way of life and our ability to think positively and think creatively. And this can cause us to go into a fight, flight, or freeze mode where we may choose to protect ourselves and you know, kind of put our heads down, take a break, because it can be very difficult. And so hope is a critical aspect of your theory of action that is really needed in order for players to not only care about the problem and the solutions that are proposed, but feel that the environment and the cause and the purpose is important enough that even if they face difficult challenges or friction, that it's worth it to keep going because a sustainable and resilient future is important enough to them. And so being resilient to change, even when things are difficult, is very important. And this is something that games are very well positioned to do because we have the ability to reframe players' relationship with failure. Unlike in the real world where mistakes or inaction in the climate movement can result in some pretty severe consequences, in games we have the ability to enable players to fail safely and keep trying. And that's something that the climate movement sorely needs right now. And so thinking about hope as a problem-solving mindset and construct rather than an emotion is very important. And so just to summarize that piece, it's important for us when we think about self-efficacy to know that know and help players establish that they can identify a problem, know the potential solutions to the problem, know it's worth it enough to pursue those solutions because they have that awareness, attitude, and confidence. All right, so assuming that we can establish those aspects of our theory of action, we can then think about the actual activation itself, or the action itself. How players can act individually or together because they understand the solution and they know and are prepared to act on it. This is the part where we want to make sure to ask the question of how accessible the solution proposed is for players, given where they are, given the resources that they may have access to. Are there different ways that players from different walks of life can still engage in advocacy for a solution in the event they cannot directly, physically be there and participate in it? That approachability and that accessibility of the experience is very important because players who see a solution, or people in general see a solution, need to keep moving forward, only to find that they are not able to move forward, can result in distress and can result in the very opposite reaction that we want to create, which is I'll just keep my head down, I'll just focus on what I can, and I will just ignore what I do not have control over. And so thinking about how we can engage people at different points in their climate journey is very crucial. But assuming that all of these components have been established, that enables us to then have a stronger signal for how this may scale. And thinking about the different ways in which a solution can be normalized because it's present in games, more players know about it, more people are talking about it, more policymakers are advocating for it because their constituents want it and are voting for it. What is the point at which we can create that collective momentum and make the solution such a day-to-day part of the conversation that it becomes expected? And that's something that we hope to establish with this game design workshop. Because while we want to caution and say that it is not possible for a single game to have every single climate solution under the sun, the more games come out with pro-environmental themes, the more games that come out with climate actions associated and attached, the more normal this becomes, and the more values aligned our overall potential addressable market becomes, and the more approachable or accessible a regenerative future becomes. How then do we measure progress? And I know that I'm over time. Just running through this very quickly, I know that there's a lot of questions in your mind percolating about like, okay, how do I break this down? How do I keep this on track? How do we know we're making progress? I just want to do a quick reminder that the way in which you as game designers and developers break down the core concepts of your game, create the core loop and the context around the core loop to create a sense of player engagement and retention and excitement, are the very things that are going to be incredibly crucial for your theory of action when making a game focused on impact. And so this is a lot of information, but like definitely keep your hope and excitement, because the curiosity and delight and compulsion to continue the experience that we make as game developers is exactly what the climate movement needs. So I will just note, I know that this is the last piece, that this will not be a deep dive into research methodologies and mixed methods best practices. That's a whole separate talk and course. So just leverage this as a starting point for what discussions are in your mind and what you may eventually want to measure. If you're interested in a deeper conversation, please chat with Trevin, reach out to us after this session. So quickly, in thinking about ways in which you could design, say, a set of questions or a survey or interviews with players when trying to understand how they're interpreting and responding to the experience you create, you could ask them before the game starts, if they were to explain climate change or a problem to a friend, what would you tell them? You could ask them about what they know about the problem in general, what they do and do not think contributes to climate change. You could then do a pre and post test before and after the game to understand like how the cause and effect relationships have been interpreted. So if they have a completely different interpretation of what's happened in your game, that is still a very positive signal because we know what to do and modify. And then after this, you can also ask players, like, do they feel more prepared? Do they feel more confident in the ability to talk about the problem and the potential solutions? Do they feel like a solution and the ability to advocate for it is accessible to them? And lastly, when you're thinking about concrete explicit actions, you can identify the types of behaviors that they engage with in the game that map to those solution pathways. You can partner with a local or regional organization who is doing that active climate work to help do up a strategic partnership where you can have players play the game and then have them be connected to local or regional efforts that they can have more access to. You can also think about more like broader local to global initiatives like pledges, like live stream, like charity events, or call drives where you're engaging with local policymakers, you're creating a petition to then take to the people who are, guiding policy. But overall, there are many different steps that you can take, and there are many different ways to measure. The main thing that I want to assert here that Trevin will go more into is that you do not have to do all of these steps at once. You can break down your game to focus on very specific aspects of this with the hope that there will be other games that can help strengthen and fill out the broader theory of action. And this collective movement is what will enable us as an industry and as a global community to normalize climate-conscious game design and content. So now there is a breakout group and a hands-on activity. The tiny URL guide here has a recap of these slides as well as some game design tactics from our environmental game design playbook. And so I hope that you have a great session. Here for questions if you need.